Hello everyone. The topic chosen for today was partly motivated by a Bible text that Jeff Guy highlighted in our Saturday morning Bible study 2 weeks ago. For those of you who enjoy interactive discussion of Bible themes, there are a number of age-relevant online Bible study discussion groups, and they meet via internet live streaming and begin around 9:30 each Saturday morning. All you need is an internet-connected device like a phone, a tablet, a laptop or a desktop computer. And you can follow the links on the Wallsend Seventh-day Adventist Church website and be socially and spiritually connected while being physically distant. Now back to our text on the slide. The top one is Jeff's Bible text from Hebrews 11 verse 6. And I imagine you've read both of the texts by now. Now about reading, during my student days at school, I discovered that while reading can be an enjoyable experience, to be honest, I found that some classes made it quite a chore. And just in case this reaches the person from our house who teaches high school English, it's probably best not to say too much about the chore part. However, I do appreciate that there are different levels at which literature can be read, and that more often than not, mathematics is the choice of language if one is interested in being precise and unambiguous. When reading, sometimes the story gallops along and the eyes and the brain can scarcely keep up with the pace. And then there are other times when a more meditative approach is necessary to dig deeper into the meaning, or so I was told by the teacher attempting to deliver the Australian poetry curriculum and their myriad of literary devices. Examine the words and possible meanings, she kept telling us. Write essays about what the author is trying to say, she said. I quickly discovered that many English words have multiple meanings, and particularly this is a challenge to our friends who have English as a second language. And so to Hebrews 11 verse 6, and particularly when it's read together with 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. And in fact, when read together with most of the New Testament, it's better taken at a slower pace, often slowing to consider the individual words that have been translated from the Greek. Now, based upon my particular interest, I have highlighted some difficult but simple words. Faith. How is faith related to belief? How is faith related to evidence? How is faith related to truth? How is faith developed? Is the size of a mustard seed sufficient? How much evidence is sufficient for faith to prosper? There are many Bible studies there, but we must press onward. The next word from Hebrews 11 verse 6 that I've highlighted is the word God. Here is a very small selection of Bible texts about God. This is one difficult, simple word. Who is God? Where did God come from? Is God scary, as Exodus 33 verse 5 seems to suggest? The Bible indicates that God is the master of the universe, the one in charge. Notice how God reveals to his friend Moses that he is compassionate and gracious, maintaining love and forgiving. God is the infinity, but he's able to connect with finite humans. How is this possible? In Psalm 104 and in other verses, we find that God has control over nature and the natural world. The difficult, simple words keep coming, and so on to the next one. Towards the end of Hebrews 11 verse 6, there is the word seek. How do humans seek God? Is there some formula, some set of procedures that we follow? And does the seeking come to an end at some point? And let's go back up one line, the one I've highlighted in orange. The word exists. This one is a real puzzle. Philosophers for centuries have built and demolished all sorts of ideas around this word. What is the nature of reality? What is it made of? Does reality depend on consciousness? Well, quantum physics says yes, it does. What processes and tools are valid for determining the nature of existence? What is the meaning of life? Today we're going to take a little peek into this difficult but simple word. So these two texts provide us with a major challenge. Perhaps I can phrase it in the form of an English essay question. Does God exist? Give at least 3 reasons to support your answer. So let's dwell on this idea of existence for a moment. And as an experiment, I surveyed 100 people that I made up in my head and asked them all the same questions. Here is a selection of the results. First question, does this rock exist? How do you know it exists if you have not visited Uluru? We know that you cannot believe everything that appears on a computer screen. Maybe someone made it up with computer graphics. Who do you believe? I guess in this case we look for a consistent eyewitness reports or personal experience to establish the reality of the rock's existence. Does this person exist? You had better believe it. However, the question becomes more challenging for historical figures. Say, for example, did Adam and Eve exist? Does the Easter Bunny exist? Similar responses for yes and no were found for Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, where the answer could be yes, these characters exist in a child's mind, but not in reality. So we see that the English language allows for something to exist, but not to be real. Next question. Did this event happen? The most recent Australian census revealed that 52% of Australians identify themselves as Christian. Why is that? Is this a 1 Peter 3:15 challenge? Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. What are the reasons? Apologetics, in the context of Christianity, is the intellectual defense of the truth of the Christian religion. It's usually considered to be a branch of theology. Over the centuries, the nature of God and the nature of God's existence have been fertile ground for opinion, discussion, banishment, genocide, and murder. Perhaps one reason suitable for 1 Peter 3:15 might come from the latter. In 1944, when Fritz Finchen was 12 years old, he and his mother Elizabeth were moved by his father Hubert to a small cabin in the Ardennes in Belgium. Hubert was a baker for the German army, and he moved the family to be protected from the fighting during the Battle of the Bulge. On Christmas Eve in 1944, Hubert had still not returned to the cabin, but Elizabeth tried to make the most of their situation. She made a Christmas meal of a few small potatoes and a rooster. Suddenly there was a knock on the cabin door. 3 American soldiers were outside. One of them explained that their friend had been shot and asked if they could come inside. Elizabeth agreed, and she had them place the injured soldier on the bed. She knew that harbouring the enemy was punishable by death, but she was willing to take that risk to help them. The injured soldier had been shot in the leg and had lost quite a lot of blood. Elizabeth and Fritz did everything that they could to help. One of the US soldiers and Elizabeth realised that they both spoke a little French. He explained to her that they had lost track of their unit and had been walking through the Ardennes for several days. She tried to make the soldiers feel as comfortable as possible. Just then, there was another knock on the door of the cabin. This time, there were 4 German soldiers at the door. One of the soldiers said that they had lost their unit and needed a place to stay. Elizabeth agreed to let them in on one condition. They had to accept her guests, the American soldiers, and leave their guns outside. She then took the guns from the Americans as well. That night, the American and German soldiers, along with the victims, had Christmas dinner together. One of the German soldiers administered first aid to the injured American soldier. Elizabeth said a prayer asking for the war to end and for them to all be protected. By the end of the prayer, all of the soldiers had tears in their eyes. Later that night, the soldiers went outside to look at the stars and each gave thanks in their own way. All the soldiers slept in the same small cabin that night. And the next morning, the German soldiers helped create a makeshift stretcher for the injured American. They also gave the American soldiers directions back to their unit. That same day, Fritz and Elizabeth left with the German soldiers and were soon reunited with Hubert. Years after this event, Fritz recalls, "Many years have now passed since that bloodiest of all wars, but the memories of that night in the Ardennes has never left me. The inner strength of a single woman who by her wits and intuition prevented potential bloodshed taught me the practical meaning of the words, goodwill towards men. And I still remember Mother and those 7 young soldiers who met as enemies and parted as friends, right in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge." Anzac Day is a national day of remembrance. Remembrance for the fallen, for the courageous and brave, and maybe just enough remembrance to prevent future generations from repeating the horror and evil that accompanies war. There are many stories coming out of wartime of compassion in times of hostility and aggression. Where does that compassion come from? How do these opposites coexist? On what basis is good identified from evil? What is the moral code that determines this, and where did it come from? These questions also involve difficult questions on the nature of humanity. The Christian religion is unique in describing the truth of the lifelong, coexisting, evil-bent, striving to be good war zone of human existence, and the importance of human will in the outcome. I think this is one of the reasons referred to in 1 Peter 3:15. Another reason revolves around the topic of the origin of life and the universe. The reasoning is based on causes, going back in history to the first cause of all things, God and the Big Bang. In my humble opinion, neither view is clear winner on this one, although Christians can go one step further back to God as a cause. It's a short-lived gain, as the question then becomes who or what caused God. The assertion that God has always existed and is beyond explaining is difficult for many. The third reason is related to life and its meaning, while another reason centres around hope. These are topics to be explored some other time. And so from the ideas of good as distinguished from evil and a moral code, origins, meaning and hope, one might be convinced of the existence of God and begin to build faith. But not so fast. There's more to it than an initial set of arguments. For the Bible reveals a God who knows everything, can see the past and the future, and can be everywhere at once. These are difficult ideas, even for someone with a Christian heritage, let alone someone who is new to Christianity. My experience is that while Christian apologetics has quite a bit to say about whether there is or is not a supreme being, little is said about how an infinite being is able to interact with humanity. Does God exist and live in our universe? How does the infinite cram into the finite? This brings us back to Hebrews 11 verse 6 and the nature of existence. We can measure many things in the natural world, very large things containing billions upon billions of stars, many larger than our sun, are known to exist in the scientific sense. Data obtained from sensors reveal the importance of gravity at these very large scales. In what do they exist? And the answer, of course, is space-time, another difficult, simple word. Imagine that I need to go and get more food for the household. Fortunately, the shop is close, so we'll walk. Here is a map with home as the green box in the top left, and X marks the spot for the shop on the right. To represent the route, we need two spatial dimensions, which allows me to go left and right or forwards and backwards. If I lived in a one-dimensional world, I could only go backwards or forwards and not sideways. So here we go, out the house and southward down the street, which I have identified as the negative direction down the stream. Turn left onto the main street through the suburb, which is east, then south again to follow the street, and turn again to keep going down the hill. I get to Newcastle Road, and then I have to cross the road at the traffic light, which fortunately is green, so I go straight across, and then into the shops, X. Does this sound familiar? Well, of course, you don't have exactly the same route. Perhaps your house is better looking than my green box, and perhaps the shops are nothing like an X, but it's easy to believe that such an event exists. More to the point, the event exists in both space and time, the fabric of existence for humans. How do we put in the time variation? One way is to make the red line grow in length, as we have just seen. Another way is to add another dimension, like this. Going east is along the front dimension, going south is going in the negative north, which is back into the screen, and the time dimension is at right angles to both of these, going up the screen. The red line represents the event sequence, which I can label going to get ice cream. We can now see the whole ice cream fetching event all over space and time. If we choose a point at some time in this picture, then from that point we can see the past and the future all laid out. This is a feature of the nature of existence, its dimensions, what you plot, and the perspective of the viewer. Now I can project this 3D picture onto the two dimensions of space, and I can recover the view that we first drew. Some other possibilities, among many, are to view this from the perspective of one space and the time dimension. Here is what that would look like. They are different. The stuff, which is a technical term in which things exist for us humans, is space-time. We know that the universe has a speed limit, the speed of light. We do not know why it is the value that it is. We know that time passes differently for each person, and we know how to work out this difference because we know that it depends on relative speed and also on gravity. The rules for these relationships are collectively known as the theory of general relativity. Using this set of rules, we have been able to develop microwave ovens, GPS navigation, and many other technologies. This makes black holes particularly interesting because gravity is sufficiently large near these things that they skew space-time geometry so much that time appears to cease and the perspective becomes one where all events can be seen at once. The Bible indicates that time can be no more. Our understanding from physics says that yes, this is possible, for the fabric of existence allows for a shortening or lengthening of both space and time within our four-dimensional existence framework. Moving barriers between past and future and trading time for space are familiar ideas in physics and might provide insights into biblical ideas related to prophecy and an omnipresent supreme being. One obvious question, why a four-dimensional existence? Are there more than four? Some insights into this come from considering the very small. What happens if we take an object and we divide it in half, and then in half, and then half again, going smaller and smaller? Is there a limit to the dividing? The Greek philosophers said yes, there is, and the smallest would be an atom, a Greek word meaning indivisible. We now know that the atom, the indivisible, can be split, but the quest for the smallest continues. Quantum physics is the most successful set of rules that can probe and predict the nature of existence of the very, very tiny. This includes all of chemistry, nuclear reactions, and even viruses. Your mobile phone, computer, in fact all electronic devices, LED lighting, and many other technologies are based on these rules of quantum physics. One of the rules says that space-time is chopped up into discrete little bits, much like the pixels on your computer screen. Another rule specifies how things come into existence and how this is related to who is looking. The Schrödinger cat analogy. This brings the idea of consciousness into the mix, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Now, the big question in the search for understanding the fabric of existence is how to combine the set of rules for the very large, i.e. general relativity, with those for the very, very tiny, the quantum physics. What are the rules for a combined theory of quantum gravity? We don't know, but for some time, efforts to combine these rules into a consistent set lay in what is known as string theory, which we won't go into today. Google it. There is growing unease that string theory is not really making much progress in understanding the nature of existence. This is where pure mathematics, as compared to applied maths, comes into its own. Moving beyond string theory, there is one idea called emergence theory. Coming out of quantum gravity research group in Los Angeles, the idea actually proposes an 8-dimensional structure. Using an illustration from this research, I borrowed some items from the kids' toy cupboard and built 2 connected cubes from plastic sticks. Even though you are viewing this on a 2-dimensional screen, you can see that I'm holding a 3-dimensional shape. I've taken this outside the house with the sun shining to project the cube structure shadow onto the wall. Now, depending on how I move the cubes, the shapes in the 2D projection shadow can appear as connected triangles. And if I actually hold and move the cubes, the shapes in the 2D can show squashed rectangles and all sorts of shapes that have no symmetry and look nothing like the original 2 cubes. The aspect of interest in the world of the very, very tiny are repeating patterns and symmetric designs. The important feature is that something that exists in a high dimensional space can appear quite different, destroy original symmetry, and change shape when projected into a lower dimensional space, even though they are clearly related. A critical parameter in the angle is the angle of projection. It turns out that angles related to the golden ratio, as used in design and architecture, pineapples and seashells, are of particular importance, but that's a topic for another time. Some of the fundamental ideas in the 8-dimensional space are free will and consciousness, with an ability for consciousness to influence both the past and the present and the future, depending on how this higher dimensional space is being projected down into our 4-dimensional space-time existence. Of course, free will and consciousness are difficult, simple words and not well understood. And so, after such a brief overview, I hope you are not too lost. Understanding difficult, simple words is a long-term quest, with new insights added or discarded over time, driven by the natural inquiring nature of the human mind. Arguments for the existence or not of God have been around for centuries. However, once past those, we find difficult, simple words are also used to express what God is like and whether God can interact in meaningful ways with humanity. Perhaps with a developing understanding of existence in higher dimensional spaces, we can begin to appreciate some of the characteristics that the Bible assigns to God. With a flexibility in time and space, invisible yet able to be visible, and a consciousness that is able to interact with human minds. How to express what anything looks like in a dimensional space beyond that which we experience is difficult. Here is one attempt to do so from Psalm 19, which includes the four-dimensional space-time aspects, plus the divine consciousness that gently tugs on our hearts. God's glory is revealed in the natural world, inviting us to explore and question. But perhaps more importantly, God invites us to walk this life and the next with Him. Dear Father, thank you for an inquiring mind and the clues we find in the Bible to understand your great and wondrous acts. You are the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may go through the gates into the city. Even so, come Lord Jesus. And the church said, Amen.